The first thing the alien fleet noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the wrong kind. Orbital Defense Station Tyrak. 9 had a reputation across half the galaxy. Built by the brutal Korth Dominion, the station was a fortress the size of a small moon. Its cannons had vaporized fleets. Its garrisons were filled with species that evolved in gravity strong enough to crush human bones. Normally, the station roared with activity. Fighter patrols launching, command officers shouting orders, security drones scanning every corridor. But right now, nothing. Admiral Vorkesh leaned forward in his command throne aboard the Dominion flagship, staring at the tactical display. Status report. A technician flicked his claws nervously across the console. Station Tyrak. 9 is still not responding. That is impossible. The Admiral's voice was low and dangerous. Communications? Oh, fine. Defense cannons? Power down. Vorkesh's 4 eyes narrowed. Tyrak. 9 never went offline. Never. Unless something inside the station had already gone catastrophically wrong. Then a junior officer spoke up hesitantly. Admiral, there was one transmission before the signal cut. Vorkesh turned slowly. Play it. The recording filled the bridge. Static, metal scraping, distant alarms. Then a terrified voice from the station security chief. We don't know how it got inside. A loud crash echoed. Heavy footsteps. Then the officer whispered the word that made the entire bridge freeze. Human. The recording ended. Vorkesh leaned back slowly. A single human disabled Tyrak 9? No, admitted. The technician swallowed. The internal sensors registered only one life form moving through the station. Exactly one. The Admiral let out a deep rumbling laugh. Then this will be quick. He turned toward the fleet. Prepare boarding parties. Capture the human alive. But deep inside Tyrak 9, the station lights flickered. A door slid open, and a very small figure stepped calmly into the corridor. No automat, no visible weapons. Just a young-looking human in an oversized jacket, holding a cup of coffee. The security cameras tracked the human as they walked past a row of disabled combat drones. Then the human stopped, looked up at the camera, and smiled. Oh, good, the human said casually. You're watching now. Before we continue, take 2 seconds to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. If you were alone on an alien war station, what would your first move be? Because what happened next inside Tyrak? 9 would become required reading in every military academy in the galaxy. And it would all start with one simple mistake. The Korth Dominion believed humans were weak, small, fragile. What they didn't understand yet was that humans didn't win wars by being stronger. They won them by being dangerously creative. And the human currently walking through Tyrak 9 had been planning this mission for 3 years. 30 minutes earlier, Tyrak 9 had been operating normally. Patrol rotations, weapons checks, security drones gliding through corridors polished by centuries of military discipline. For the Korth Dominion, this station was more than a fortress. It was a symbol. Tyrak 9 had never been successfully infiltrated. Not once in its 214-year operational history. Its internal sensors could detect a mouse-sized organism from 3 kilometers away. Its corridors were patrolled by armored soldiers bred for war on high-gravity worlds. Nothing entered Tyrak 9 without permission, and nothing survived if it tried. So when the first alert appeared on the internal network, the response was immediate. Unidentified life form detected, Deck 17. Commander Raktal frowned at the notification. A malfunction? One of the technicians shook his head. No, Commander. Sensor confirme biological signature. Raktal leaned closer to the display. Species classification, human. That made the room go quiet. A human? Here, impossible. Humans lived hundreds of light years away. Their territory barely brushed the outer edges of Dominion space. Even if one had somehow reached Tyrak 9, getting inside would require bypassing 7 layers of biometric security. Still, protocol was clear. Raktal tapped his wrist console. Send Patrol Unit 7. Within seconds, 4 Dominion soldiers were moving through Deck 17. They were enormous creatures. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies wrapped in layered combat armor designed to withstand plasma artillery. Their claws could crush reinforced steel. Against almost any species in the galaxy, 4 of them were overwhelming force. The patrol rounded a corner and stopped. Standing in the middle of the corridor was the human. Small, young, almost childlike in appearance. Dark hair, slightly messy. Oversized jacket hanging loosely over thin shoulders. And in one hand, a metal coffee cup. One of the soldiers tilted his head. That is the intruder? Another soldier snorted. It looks like a juvenile. The human looked up slowly. Their eyes moved from one towering alien to the next. Then they took a slow sip from the coffee. "Hey," the human said casually. "Quick question." The soldiers exchanged amused glances. One stepped forward. "You will surrender immediately." The human blinked. "Oh, I can do that." The soldier relaxed slightly. "Place your hands on the wall." The human nodded. "Sure." They raised one hand, but instead of touching the wall, they tapped a small device clipped inside their sleeve. The corridor lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the hallway. The soldiers' helmets switched instantly to infrared, and what they saw made every one of them freeze. The human hadn't moved, but every security drone in the corridor had suddenly activated. All 12 of them, and every weapon on those drones was now aimed at the Dominion patrol. The human took another sip of coffee. "Oh," they said, "I probably should have mentioned something." A drone's targeting laser slid across the lead soldier's chest. "I'm not actually trapped in here with you." The human smiled faintly. "You're trapped in here with me." 3 decks above the silent corridor, the central command chamber of Tyrak. 9 suddenly exploded with alarms. Red warning lights flashed across every console. Technicians snapped upright. "What triggered that?" one officer barked. A sensor operator stared at the diagnostics in disbelief. "Security drone network just activated on Deck 17. That's standard protocol." "No, Commander," the technician said slowly. "They activated without a command." Across the room, Commander Ractal turned sharply. "Show me." The tactical screen shifted to the Deck 17 corridor. 4 Dominion soldiers stood frozen in place. 12 combat drones surrounded them, and in the middle of the scene, a small human stood casually drinking coffee. Ractal growled, "How did the intruder override our drones?" A systems officer frantically typed commands. "I'm attempting manual control." The console flashed. "Access denied." The officer blinked. "That shouldn't happen." Ractal's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Explain." "The command authorization has been rewritten." "By the human?" The technician hesitated. "I don't think so." Ractal's eyes narrowed. "Then by who?" The officer zoomed in on the system logs. Lines of code scrolled across the display. Then he froze. "Commander, yes. These permissions were uploaded 2 weeks ago." The room went completely silent. 2 weeks. That meant the system override wasn't a spontaneous hack. It had been planted, hidden, waiting. And suddenly, every officer in the room had the same horrifying thought. The human on Deck 17 hadn't just broken into Tyrak 9. They had been inside the station's systems for weeks. Down in the corridor, the lead Dominion soldier slowly raised his claws away from his weapon. 12 drones hovered silently around the patrol. Their weapons hummed softly. The human watched them with mild curiosity. "Yeah," the human said, glancing a wrist display. "That looks about right." One of the soldiers growled. "You infiltrated Dominion military systems?" The human shrugged. "Technically." They took another sip of coffee. "I infiltrated them a while ago." Up in the command chamber, Ractal leaned closer to the screen. The human suddenly looked directly into the camera and waved. "Hi," the human said cheerfully. Every officer in the room stiffened. Because the human shouldn't have known the command staff was watching. The human tilted their head. "Oh, relax," they said. "I've been monitoring this control room for, let's see." They checked the wrist display. "About 43 minutes. A technician whispered in horror. "Commander, yes." They're inside our command network. Ractal's claws dug into the console. Deploy heavy response units. Immediately, the human was still smiling at the camera. But the commander's instincts were screaming now. Because Prey didn't behave like this. Prey ran. Prey panicked. This human looked like someone casually walking through their own house. And that realization made Ractal feel something very unfamiliar. On knees, Commander Ractal didn't believe in hesitation. On Dominion battlefields, hesitation meant death. Release the Varnak hunters, he ordered. Several officers looked up sharply. The Varnak were not ordinary soldiers. They were biological weapons. Bred on the high-gravity death world of Korth Prime, a Varnak could sprint faster than most ground vehicles, track heat signatures through solid walls, and tear through reinforced bulkheads with bone-reinforced claws. Even heavily armored combat squads avoided fighting them up close. And now 3 of them were being released inside Tyrak 9. Deep inside the station's containment level, massive steel gates unlocked with a thunderous clang. The Varnak stepped forward slowly. Each creature was nearly 4 meters long, its body layered with thick armored plates that looked like overlapping blades. 8 muscular limbs gripped the floor with terrifying strength. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim red light. One of the handlers activated the tracking implant. Target confirmed, he said. Human life form detected. Deck 17. The Varnak immediately began moving. Fast. Too fast. They tore through corridors like living missiles, claws scraping sparks across the metal floors as security doors automatically opened ahead of them. Back in the command chamber, officers watched the tactical display. 3 red icons raced toward the human's position. Ractal crossed his arms. This will end quickly. Meanwhile, on Deck 17, the human was still standing in a corridor, still drinking coffee. The 12 drones hovered silently around the Dominion patrol, their targeting systems locked. The human glanced at the wrist display again. Oh, they muttered. There it is. The floor began to vibrate. Heavy impacts echoed through the station. The Dominion soldiers instantly recognized the sound. Varnak, one of them hissed quietly. You called the hunters. The human looked curious. Hunters, the soldier pointed down the hallway. A moment later, the first Varnak appeared around the corner. The massive creature slowed instantly. It lowered its head, studying the human. The human studied it back. Wow, they said softly. You're bigger than the briefing pictures. The Varnak snarled and crouched, muscles coiling like steel cables preparing to snap. Behind it, the other 2 hunters spread out. 3 apex predators. 1 small human. The Dominion soldiers relaxed slightly. Even if the human controlled the drones. Nothing survived a Varnak charge. The lead hunter lunged. Blinding speed. A blur of claws and armor racing straight toward the human. But the human didn't move. Instead, they tapped something on their sleeve. A quiet click echoed in the corridor. And suddenly the floor disappeared beneath the charging Varnak. Not a hole. Not an explosion. A gravity inversion field. The Varnak launched forward and slammed violently into the ceiling. The other 2 skidded to a halt as their packmates struggled against the invisible force pinning it upside down. The human stepped casually beneath the floating monster. They tilted their head, inspecting it. Huh, they said thoughtfully. That worked better than expected. Up in the command chamber, an officer whispered in disbelief. How? Did the human activate a gravity field? Ractal stared at the screen. The human looked directly at the nearest camera again, and smiled. Oh, they said casually. I should probably mention something. They took another sip of coffee. I've already taken control of about 30% of your station. The command chamber of Tyrak 9 had never been this quiet. 3 Varnak hunters, creatures that had slaughtered entire enemy battalions, were now pinned helplessly to the ceiling of a corridor by a gravity field that shouldn't have been active. And the human responsible was calmly drinking coffee. Commander Ractal leaned closer to the tactical display. System status. A technician's claws tapped nervously across the console. Commander, we've lost control of 14 subsystems. Specify. Drone network. Interior cameras. gravity grid sections, and the console flashed. Another warning appeared. Internal security AI connection interrupted. Several officers stiffened. The station's artificial intelligence was the heart of Tyrak 9. It coordinated every system simultaneously. Defense cannons, patrol routes, environmental control, even predictive threat analysis. Nothing on the station functioned without it. Raktal spoke slowly. Re-establish connection. We're trying. The technician typed several commands. The console responded immediately. Access denied. A murmur of unease spread through the room. Another officer stepped closer to the screen. It's not just rejecting commands. What do you mean? Raktal asked. The officer highlighted a section of code. Our command permissions have been downgraded. The commander's voice dropped. Downgraded? Yes. The officer zoomed further into the system registry. Commander, the AI still recognizes us. Then why can't we control it? The officer hesitated. Because we're no longer listed as the primary administrators. Silence filled the chamber. Raktal slowly lifted his head toward the camera feed. Down on deck 17, the human was walking past the floating Varnak like someone inspecting museum exhibits. They stopped beneath one of the cameras, looked directly at it, then waved again. Hey, the human said cheerfully. Quick update. They tapped their wrist display. Across the entire station, doors suddenly slammed shut. Elevators froze mid-shaft. Security turrets powered down. Lights flickered. The station speakers crackled to life. The same calm human voice echoed through every corridor. Good afternoon, residents of Tyrak. Soldiers across the station stopped moving. Barracks fell silent. Even the command chamber officers stared at the speakers. Please remain calm, the human continued politely. Your station is currently undergoing unscheduled maintenance. Behind the human, one of the Varnak roared angrily from the ceiling. The human glanced up. Yeah, that too. Then they leaned closer to the camera. Commander Raktal, the human said calmly. The control room froze. Because the human had just addressed their leader. By name. I think it's time we had a conversation. Commander Raktal had fought in 17 campaigns across Dominion space. He had commanded fleets that burned entire planets. He had crushed rebellions before they could spread. His enemies normally broke long before he needed to escalate. But never in his career had a single intruder taken control of one of his stations. He slowly straightened in his command chair. Open a communication channel. A technician hesitated. Commander, that would give the intruder direct access to do it. The officer swallowed and tapped the console. Across the station, the speakers crackled again. But this time the voice came from the command chamber. This is Commander Raktal of Tyrak 9, he said, his deep voice echoing through the metal corridors. Human, identify yourself. For a moment, there was only the low hum of failing systems. Then a reply came. Agent Lina Carter, the calm voice said. Coalition Strategic Operations. The main screen in the command chamber flickered. A live video feed appeared. The human stood in the same corridor on deck 17. Small, young-looking, almost childlike compared to the massive aliens surrounding her. Her oversized jacket hung loosely on her shoulders, and she was still holding that irritating coffee cup. She waved. Several officers snarled angrily. One slammed a claw against the console. Commander, authorize full mobilization. Raktal raised one hand slightly. Denied. His eyes stayed fixed on the human. You infiltrated Dominion territory, he said slowly. You disable my security systems. You capture my hunters. He leaned closer to the microphone. What exactly do you think you've accomplished? Lina Carter tilted her head slightly. Oh, she said casually. I'm not finished yet. Several officers growled again, but the human didn't even glance at them. You see, Commander, she continued, the Coalition didn't send me here to destroy Tyrak 9. Raktal frowned. Then why are you here? Lina pushed herself off the wall and began walking slowly down the corridor. Every camera followed her. Every officer watched. I'm here because your dominion keeps expanding into coalition space. That is conquest, Ractal replied coldly. It is how predators survive. Right, Lina said. About that. She tapped something on her wrist display. The main tactical screen inside the command chamber suddenly changed. The station diagnostics vanished. A star map appeared instead. Then hundreds of new signals materialized across the display. Ships, human ships, surrounding the system in perfect formation. Silent, hidden until that exact moment. One officer whispered in shock. Commander, those vessels weren't there before. Lina nodded on the screen. Stealth drives are great like that. Ractal's claws tightened on the console. You brought an invasion fleet. Not really. The human shrugged. This is the part where humans try diplomacy first. She gestured toward the map. You see that fleet? They've been waiting out there for 12 hours. Ractal's eyes narrowed. Why wait? Lina smiled slightly. Because before negotiations start. She gestured around the station. We like to make sure everyone understands the situation. She pointed toward Tyrak 9. You control the soldiers. Then she pointed at the fleet surrounding the system. We control everything else. Then she leaned closer to the camera. So, Commander, would you like to start this conversation again? For several long seconds, the command chamber of Tyrak 9 was silent. The tactical display still hovered above the consoles, filled with hundreds of human ship signatures surrounding the system like quiet shadows. Commander Ractal studied the map carefully. Human fleets weren't famous for brute strength. Dominion ships were larger, heavier, and built for direct combat. But that wasn't what worried him. What worried him was how long the humans had been there without being detected. 12 hours. That meant their stealth technology had bypassed every Dominion sensor network in the system. That was not a small advantage. Still, predators didn't survive by surrendering. Ractal leaned forward slowly. You expect the Dominion to negotiate, he said. That's the general idea, Lina Carter replied, casually from the corridor camera. And if we refuse? Lina took another sip of coffee. Then things get inconvenient. Several officers growled angrily. But Ractal raised a claw to silence them. His mind was already calculating. There was still one option left. A terrible one, but predators had always believed one rule above all others. If you cannot win the hunt, make sure the enemy cannot either. Ractal's claw moved slowly across the console. He pressed a hidden command key. Deep inside Tyrak 9's reactor chamber, a dormant system activated. A red warning light blinked on the command panel. One of the technicians froze. Commander, Ractal didn't look away from the screen. Yes, you just activated the singularity reactor override. Another officer turned in shock. That will destabilize the power core. Across the station, warning alarms erupted instantly. Core instability detected. Gravitational cascade initiated. Even the officers in the chamber looked uneasy now. One technician whispered nervously, Commander, if the reactor collapses, the explosion radius will reach most of the human fleet. Ractal finally spoke again. If Tyrak 9 falls, it will take them with it. On the camera feed, Lina Carter paused. For the first time since the confrontation began, the human actually looked surprised. You're threatening to blow up your own station? She asked. Ractal's voice remained calm. If predators cannot win. He leaned closer to the console. They make sure no one else does. Across the station, the reactor alarms grew louder. Countdown indicators flashed across every Dominion console. But Lina didn't panic. Instead, she sighed. Yeah, she said quietly. I was hoping you wouldn't do that. Ractal bared his teeth. You humans claim to be unpredictable. True, Lina said. But we're also really good at planning ahead. She tapped the device on her wrist. And suddenly, the reactor countdown stopped. Every alarm on the station went silent. The red warning lights flickered once, then turned blue. A technician stared at the console in disbelief. Commander, Ractal's voice dropped to a growl. What? The reactor override. The officer swallowed. No longer responds to Dominion commands. The screen updated again. A new message appeared across every console in the room. Reactor control transferred. Authorized user, Agent Lina Carter. On the camera feed, the human gave a small shrug. Turns out, she said casually, the first system I hacked when I arrived. She took another sip of coffee. Was your power core. The command chamber of Tyrak. 9 felt colder now. Not physically, psychologically. Every officer in the room stared at the reactor console. The Dominion's most protected system had been taken over. Without a fight, without a visible attack, Commander Raktal slowly turned toward the technicians. Override the system. We're trying. The officer's claws moved quickly across the console. Command lines flashed across the display. Every single one returned the same message. Access denied. Another technician leaned closer. Commander, the reactor controls aren't just locked. Raktal's eyes narrowed. Explain. The officer enlarged the system architecture diagram. Our command pathways are still active. Then why can't we access them? The technician hesitated. Because the authority permissions have been rewritten. Another officer looked up sharply. By the human? The technician shook his head slowly. No. He zoomed further into the system registry. Lines of system history appeared on the screen. Then he froze. Commander, Raktal's voice lowered. Yes, these permissions weren't created today. How old are they? The officer swallowed. 27 days. The entire room went silent. 27 days. That meant something deeply disturbing. Agent Lina Carter hadn't just infiltrated the station today. She had been inside its systems for nearly a month. Raktal activated the communication channel again. Human. The camera feed returned instantly. Lina Carter leaned casually against the corridor wall. Still here. You claimed to infiltrate this station today. Correct. Raktal gestured toward the reactor console. Then explain why your authorization permissions were embedded in our systems 27 days ago. For the first time since the conversation began, the human actually laughed. Not arrogantly. Almost like someone impressed they had been discovered. Oh, she said. You found that already? A low rumble of anger filled the command chamber. One officer snarled. You've infiltrated Dominion military networks for nearly a month? Lina raised one finger slightly. Technically, she checked her wrist display. This particular station was only 27 days. The officers stared. Raktal felt something unfamiliar creeping into his thoughts. A quiet unease. How long? He asked slowly. Lina's smile faded slightly. Your Dominion has been expanding into coalition territory for years. Yes. So we started studying you. Raktal's voice dropped. For how long? The human considered the question for a moment, then answered calmly. 6 years. Several officers erupted in angry growls. Impossible. You infiltrated Dominion systems for 6 cycles. But Lina raised her coffee cup slightly. Actually, she tapped her wrist display again. The tactical screen in the command chamber changed. Instead of Tyrak 9 systems, a new database appeared. Hundreds of files filled the display. Dominion fleet movements, species psychology profiles, military doctrine breakdowns, even individual officer records. One technician whispered in horror. Commander, those are our classified archives. Lina nodded. Yep. Raktal stared at the screen. You've been studying us. Correct. What? The human looked directly into the camera. Because humans don't like surprises in war. She took another sip of coffee. So we prepare. Then she delivered the sentence that made the entire room go silent. And Tyrak 9 isn't the only station we've been inside. The command chamber erupted with noise. Officers shouted. Technicians argued. Security personnel demanded authorization to mobilize the entire garrison. But Commander Raktal didn't move. He stared at the screen showing the database the human had just revealed. Thousands of Dominion files, fleet deployments, strategic plans, psychological analyses of Dominion species, even command hierarchy records. Every classified system the Dominion possessed was sitting on the display like an open book. Human, Raktal said slowly. Yes. Lina Carter replied. You claim to have infiltrated Dominion systems for 6 years. Correct. And you claim Tyrak. 9 is not the only station compromised. That's also correct. Ractal leaned closer to the microphone. How many? For a moment, Lina didn't answer. She looked down at her wrist display, scrolled through several files, then looked back at the camera. Well, she said casually. Let's see. She tapped the device. The tactical display changed again. A map of Dominion space appeared. Hundreds of star systems filled the holographic projection. Then small blue icons began lighting up across the map. 1, then 5, then 20, then more. Dozens of Dominion stations suddenly appeared highlighted. So were defense platforms. Some were shipyards. Some were strategic command hubs. Every one of them marked with the same symbol. Human access confirmed. The command chamber fell completely silent. One officer whispered in disbelief. That's impossible. Another technician stared at the map. Commander, those are some of our most secure installations. Lina nodded slightly. Yep. Ractal's claws tightened on the console. You're lying. Actually, Lina replied calmly. We've been very careful about that. She zoomed the map further. 3 of the highlighted stations suddenly flashed. Then their system status reports appeared. Dominion access permissions, security layers, i.e. protocols, and hidden beneath them, coalition infiltration marqueur. Ractal felt something he had not experienced since his early military training. Uncertainty. Why? He asked quietly. Lina leaned against the corridor wall again. You keep saying humans are weak. You're smaller, slower, physically fragile. Yes. So we adapted. She gestured toward the star map. You built an empire based on strength. We built strategies based on time. One of the officers snarled. You expect us to believe humans planned this for 6 years. Lina shrugged. Actually longer. The command chamber froze again. Ractal's voice dropped. How much longer? The human smiled faintly. 10. A low murmur spread across the room. 10 years. That meant something terrifying. The Dominion hadn't been preparing for war with humanity. Humanity had been preparing for them. Ractal studied the screen again. Dozens of Dominion stations marked with human infiltration. Silent. Waiting. Then he asked the question every officer in the room was thinking. If you have this level of control. He leaned closer to the microphone. Why attack Tyrak 9 now? Lina Carter smiled again. And this time, it wasn't friendly. Because, she said quietly, this wasn't an attack. She tapped her wrist display again. Across the station, new messages appeared on every console. Coalition diplomatique protocole initiated. The human looked back at the camera. This, she took another sip of coffee, is the negotiation phase. The command chamber of Tyrak 9 had gone completely still. No one shouted anymore. No one argued. Every Dominion officer simply stared at the tactical display, showing dozens of their own stations quietly marked with human infiltration points. Commander Ractal slowly exhaled through clenched teeth. You had the ability to cripple our infrastructure for years, he said. Lina Carter nodded slightly on the camera feed. Pretty much. And yet you did nothing. Correct. Ractal leaned forward. Why? For the first time since the conversation began, the human didn't answer immediately. She walked slowly down the corridor. Security cameras followed her movement as she passed the 3 immobilized Varnaks still pinned, helplessly, to the ceiling. Finally, she stopped beneath another camera. Because destroying your empire wasn't the goal, she said calmly. One of the officers slammed a claw on the console. You expect us to believe that? Lina glanced toward the camera again. You built your civilization around one assumption. Ractal's voice hardened. And that is that strength equals dominance. The human lifted her coffee cup slightly. Biggest ships win. Strongest soldiers win. Most aggressive species survives. Ractal didn't reply, because that assumption had guided Dominion strategy for centuries. Lina continued. But humans evolved on a very strange planet. How so? The commander asked. On Earth, Lina said, humans weren't the strongest predators. We weren't the fastest. We didn't have claws. We didn't have armor. She took another sip of coffee. So we developed something else. One of the officers growled. Tricks. Lina smiled slightly. Planning. She gestured toward the station. You built Tyrak. 9 to intimidate your enemies. Raktal nodded once. Yes. And today, Lina continued. One human walked inside it and took control. The room went quiet again. Raktal stared at the screen. You could have sent fleets. True. You could have launched a surprise attack. Also true. Instead, he leaned closer. You sent one human. Lina nodded. That was intentional. Why? The human's expression softened slightly. Because if we sent an army, she said, your dominion would assume the war had already started. Raktal felt a slow realization forming. And this, he asked. This, Lina said calmly, is us proving something first. She tapped her wrist display again. The tactical map shifted. The human fleet surrounding the system zoomed into view. Hundreds of ships, silent, patient, waiting. Then Lina looked directly into the camera. We don't want your territory. We don't want your stations. We don't even want Tyrak 9. She leaned closer. But if you push into coalition space again, her voice dropped slightly. We want you to understand what will happen. Raktal finally spoke. And what exactly is that? Lina Carter smiled faintly. The same thing that just happened to this station. Commander Raktal sat motionless in the command chair. The screen still glowed with the hundreds of blue icons marking Dominion stations now under human surveillance. The fleet outside Tyrak. 9 remained in perfect formation, silent, waiting for a single command. Every officer in the room knew the stakes. One wrong move, one impulsive action, and the station, and possibly half of Dominion territory in this sector, could be compromised. Raktal's claws tightened on the console. Years of training and battle instinct screamed at him to strike, to assert dominance, to reclaim control by force. But something in him hesitated. A small human had walked into the heart of his empire, dismantled the station system by system, neutralized Apex hunters without a fight, hijacked the reactor, and revealed plans of infiltration that had taken 6 years to build. A human. One human. Commander, a subordinate finally said, his voice trembling, we could deploy the fleet. Crush her. Retake the station. Show dominance. Raktal shook his head slowly. No, he said, voice low and measured. That is exactly what she expects. That is exactly the mistake we cannot afford. The human on the camera, Lina Carter, sipped her coffee calmly. You're thinking of striking, she said gently, almost conversationally. Don't. That's not how humans operate. Raktal narrowed his 4 eyes. Then tell me how you operate. She smiled faintly. We observe. We plan. We wait. And only then we act decisively. Raktal leaned back, processing everything. Every strategy, every prediction, every defense of the Dominion had been accounted for by a species that wasn't even physically dominant in combat. Do you think, he said quietly, that predators can survive against a species that plans decades ahead? Lina looked at him calmly. Depends on the predator. He stared at her image on the screen, the way she looked childish and unassuming despite holding the fate of Tyrak, 9, and perhaps the entire sector, in her hands. Then she tilted her head slightly. But you, she continued, can survive if you adapt. Raktal exhaled slowly, realizing the impossible truth. For the first time in his life, the fate of his empire rested not on strength or intimidation, but on whether he could understand a species unlike any he had ever faced, and whether predators could evolve beyond the instinct to dominate. Lina Carter tapped her wrist display. All systems stabilized. Tyrak 9 is operational, but it's under new management temporarily. The command chamber officers exchanged uneasy glances. Raktal spoke, voice low but firm. Very well, human. You have proven your point. But understand this. Lina raised an eyebrow. Yes. Any aggression against coalition space, and the next demonstration will be final. The human smiled faintly. Understood. That's why we sent one human first. The command chamber of Tyrak, 9 had gone utterly silent. For hours, officers sat frozen, staring at screens that once symbolized Dominion control, now showing human oversight of systems they had sworn were impenetrable. Commander Ractal finally stood, his massive form looming over the consoles. His 4 eyes scanned the room, taking in the shocked faces of his subordinates. "This changes everything," he said slowly. His voice carried both the weight of command and the tremor of newfound understanding. Lina Carter's feed remained live, her small frame calm and composed, almost childish in contrast to the armored predators around her. She leaned casually against the corridor wall, coffee cup in hand, and smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "but it doesn't have to be the end of your species." The officers murmured among themselves, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. Ractal studied Lina for a long moment, realizing that the humans had done something unprecedented. They hadn't attacked, destroyed, or coerced. They had demonstrated power through preparation, precision, and patience. A single individual had achieved what entire fleets of predators could not: total psychological domination without a single casualty. He gestured toward the screens, displaying dozens of human ships silently orbiting the system. "And if we resist?" he asked. Lina's smile widened, but it was calm, almost clinical. "Then Tyrak, 9 will not be enough to contain us," she said. "We have patience, we have plans, and we have time." The Dominion officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had always relied on strength to maintain control, on aggression to enforce order. Humanity introduced a different kind of warfare, one built on intelligence, patience, and unpredictability. Ractal closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. His voice was steady. "Very well. We will cease expansion into coalition space. Tyrak, 9 remains under Dominion command, but we will adapt." Lina nodded slightly. "Good. That's all we ask. Learn to coexist. Learn to anticipate. Learn that not all threats are brute force. Some are subtle and patient." Across the station, the immobilized Varnak hunters were released, returning cautiously to the floor. Systems resumed partial control, but the lesson had been learned. Humans could not be underestimated. Ractal turned to his officers. "Report this to the High Council. Tell them the humans are not a species to challenge lightly. They do not fight like us. They fight like this." He gestured toward the monitor where Lina sipped her coffee, small and calm in the chaos of a predator-controlled station. "And in time, we must learn to survive that." Lina looked at the camera one last time, a faint grin playing across her face. "Remember," she said softly, "war isn't about winning every fight. It's about ensuring the next one is yours to choose." The feed went dark. Tyrak, 9 was secure, but the message had spread through the Dominion. Human strategy was unmatched, patient, and utterly unpredictable. And somewhere in the galaxy, every species would learn the same lesson. Humans don't just fight. Humans plan. Umanzandura. And with that, a new era began.